waiting in the wings. That's humming. Okay, can you hear me? Is that good? I have a little housekeeping thanks to do. First, some announcements for the Gloucester Writers Center. There's some wonderful poetry events coming up in the next few weeks, including readings by Mark Paulak and Mary Bonina, and a poetry salon with Ken Chen and Yanaka Stuckey. Also, memoirist and Boston public defender Helen Fremont returns to the Gloucester Writers Center and will read on October 30th. Gloucester Writers Center closes out the year with Alan Weissman reading from his new book, Countdown, at the Rocky Neck Cultural Center on December 6th. Help yourself to event flyers and the Gloucester Writers Center calendar, and leave your email if you want to get Gloucester Writers Center blasts. I also want to thank everyone from the Writers Center, particularly Annie Thomas and Henry Farini, and of course, Vincent, wherever he is. I also want to thank everyone at the Cape Ann Museum, particularly Rhonda Falloon, Courtney Richardson, and Martha Oakes, whom I've had the pleasure of working very closely with over the last year, and it's an extraordinary institution in all senses, and having Amiri Baraka here makes it even more so. I'm humbled and honored to have this opportunity to introduce Amiri. It's the second time around for me, and it doesn't get any easier. So I just want to warn you, this is a real introduction, so I really thought through this. If performance, image, object, and sound making are forms of knowledge, then what we now call art gives us a unique view of how things in the world are or are not responded to. In 1944, the great Martinican poet Aimé Césaire wrote, "Poetic knowledge is born in the great silence of scientific knowledge." He also wrote, "What presides over the poem is not the most lucid intelligence, the sharpest sensibility, or the subtlest feelings, but experience as a whole." That same year, Césaire's student, Frantz Fanon, perhaps aspiring to also become a writer, found himself in Algeria as a French soldier and was horrified by what he experienced. It would lead him to become one of the 20th century's most innovative psychiatrists, its most important theorist of race and colonization, and an Algerian revolutionary. On this side of the Atlantic, in the only hemisphere so thoroughly dispossessed that not one state officially uses a native language, bebop had already come into being, a phenomenon that Jack Kerouac called the language of America's inevitable Africa, expressing the enormity of a New World philosophy. In 1944, Kerouac met Allen Ginsberg, and poet Robert Duncan published The Homosexual in Society, announcing a new doctrine of human liberation that would also ensure his continued unrecognition as one of the century's greatest poets. In 1944, alerted to changes in US policy in which Nazis and war criminals got filtered through the OSS and State Department to become key policymakers and scientists, Charles Olson resigned from his post at the Office of War Information to become, of all things, a poet. Just some months before that, in a trial in Alabama over his status as a conscientious objector in the Second World War, Herman Poole Blount, known as Sonny, and later Sun Ra, did the unthinkable and unheard of. He told a white judge in the Deep South that if he was forced to learn how to kill, he would use that skill without prejudice and kill one of his own captains or generals first. The judge said, "I've never seen a nigger like you before." To which Sonny replied, "No, and you never will again." A response that immediately landed him in jail. His psychiatric report echoed those of Lester Young, Charlie Parker, Bud Powell, Charles Mingus, and so many others, in which he was described as a psychopathic personality, but also a well-educated colored intellectual who was subject to neurotic depression and sexual perversion. These are the over and undercurrents of the world Amiri Baraka grew up in. Born Everett Leroy Jones in Newark, New Jersey, where Amiri's son Raz is running for mayor. Keep an eye on that election, very important election. In 1934, Baraka's importance and multiple legacies are truly mammoth. In a review of a book on Billy the Kid, Charles Olson wrote, "What strikes one about the history of said states, U.S., both as it has been converted into story and as there are those who are always looking for it to reappear as art, what has hit me is that it does stay unrelieved." This sense of the unrelieved and the pressures that brings to bear on what poet Ed Dorn called this permissive asylum is enormous, and we know that the past can't simply disappear. Given the circumstances of destroyed languages and peoples, slavery, and layered diasporas, we have a human, political, and cultural amalgam on this continent as dense and complicated as any the world has ever known. The explosion of expression following World War II, bebop, abstract expressionism, the new American poetries, the black arts movement, free jazz, Afrofuturism, and a host of other groupings and labels is a massive response to this complexity and represents an era of creativity that measures up to any known age of accomplishment we can think of. At the same time, facing the academic, ideological, and political straitjackets of the Cold War, these artists were first and foremost thinkers, and their work constitutes a vast realm of hardly explored concepts about the world we actually live in. Amiri Baraka is one of a handful of the remaining key representatives of this era, and his personal, artistic, and political life cuts through every significant intersection of the age. There are no other living American writers able to traverse the traditional generic trio of poetry, prose, and drama, then move into the realms of essay, criticism, autobiography, and scholarship while making an authoritative mark in each form. In fact, if we take the great British scholar Gordon Brotherston's definition that the prime function of a classical text, is to construct political space and anchor historical continuity, then Amiri Baraka is one of our truly classical writers. His disruptive and political practice refuses to conform to style or manner, allowing imagination to roam between the placard and the eulogy, between eyewitness reports stating facts and cosmic journeys reinstating the kinship of souls. He has both been anchoring historical continuity and redrawing the political boundaries of time and space, first in Newark, New Jersey, then in New Ark, Out and Gone, an otherworldly place through which he channels radio shows, movies, street banter, memories, diatribe, drama, scholarly study, fable, fiction, science fiction, investigative poetics, calculated public rhetoric, and on-the-spot reporting. He is a fantastic witness both to the astonishing unreality of the daily real and an example of what can be done to respond to it. He has constantly exposed himself and his ideas to public scrutiny, even attack, opening a window into participation in the amalgamation of selves and ideas that form the creative political subject, that is, ourselves. Amiri's example has served as a constant reminder that such selves, ideas, forms, even communities are won through struggle and confrontation with oneself and the world. They're not cheaply packaged and exchangeable things to pick up or drop for personal gain or according to dictates of fashion. Finally, this clarity of purpose rests in a stance, a position, a place one has come to in consciousness and over which there can be no negotiation. The visibility of such a stance, bound to a real historical context, a real place, is itself a call to action, to activate those parts of one's own consciousness and meet such a challenge in like terms. In recent years, Amiri has been quite explicit about the need to emphasize and carry on his diverse legacies, and they are quite diverse and important. He has been extraordinarily generous in working, for instance, with the Lost and Found Project. This began with a small collection of letters between him and Ed Dorn, finally resulting in the complete correspondence out next month from the University of New Mexico. Most recently, Amiri has lent his support to Il Gruppo, a gathering of writers initially convened to debunk a recent book claiming that Charles Olson was an exemplar of US imperialism. and that projective verse was based on a military paradigm. In that somewhat macabre light, because Amiri actually published projective verse, meaning that if Olson is a big imperialist, perhaps by association Amiri is a small one, in that macabre light, let us, without further ado, give it up for Amiri Baraka.
Yeah, I was up here a couple of times to see Charles and discuss the past and the future at the same time. And so this little small essay of mine, I read, and probably a couple of poems, because if you're a poet, you have to read poetry, otherwise you lose your license, you know. So this is called Charles Olson and Sun Ra, a note on being out. I wrote a book recently called, what is it called? Notes on the Out and the Gone. And that was a big expression in the 60s. You know, something was out, somebody was out. That means they were not the usual. They were out. If you cannot make the connection that is between Olson and Sun Ra, you cannot understand the typology of that time in which they and some of us lived. Both are older than most of those they influenced. Olson born 1910, Worcester, Massachusetts. Sun Ra, 1914, Birmingham, Alabama. Likewise, their careers, in quotes, were their lives, and the changes they went through and influenced us to make. Olson began as an ascendant in the academic world, success, until his PhD thesis on Melville, when, with the help of a Guggenheim, he dropped out. And with World War II, became Assistant Chief of Foreign Language Division, Office of War Information. From there into politics on the Democratic Party's National Committee, and chafing at the restriction and incompetence and bureaucracy, he drops out of there. His first book was an extension of the PhD thesis, but much differently formed. That's called, the book that came out of that was called Call Me Ishmael, the brief study of Herman Melville and Shakespeare and America. Later, he became the rector at Black Mountain College, which was a nurturer both of Olson and an emerging American avant-garde in literature, painting, sculpture, dance, music from 1948 until its closing in 1956. Olson didn't start writing a public poetry until he was 35. But even in the Ishmael, Olson told out his challenging summary of who and where we are. And he says, quote, I take space, big letters, I take space to be the central fact to man born in America from Folsom Cave to now. I spell it large because it comes large here, large and without mercy, unquote. So Olson's take on America first is space. It's big, space, you know. It's not a little island like England, you know. It's a huge place. That idea he comes to again in his poems, his grandly instructive essays, the essay Projective Verse, which I published, which first appeared in 1950. I published as a small pamphlet with a press that I had created called Totem Press in 1959. You know. In this essay, which I feel changed the direction of poetry in the U.S. for many young poets writing in the 50s and 60s, Olson urges the poet to stop using the closed forms of formal U.S. verse and also England. That is, quit using those closed poetic forms. That was the main thrust of that, you know. It says particularly stop using the dead inherited detritus of English poetry. That a new American poetry must be built on the ear, the breath, the sound of the poet. It would be composition by feel rather than an overused, inherited, largely academic, usually iambic form. It would eschew form as a fixed object. See, that was the key. It would eschew form as a fixed object into which one poured a poem, thereby shearing away the spontaneous, projectile, percussive perspective. Those are his quotes, quote, projectile, percussive, perspective, unquote, poetic incident caused by heart, breath, sound, and the syllable itself. Now these were very, very great concepts to us in the 50s and the 60s because they released us from the need to follow what we thought was dead, corny, English forms and those American forms. We thought it was the death of academic poetry. Little did we understand. In other words, the poem should not be contained in a box of dead preconsideration. The field was the open space of all life and memory. The poem should be open, and an experience of opening. That is, it should be open, and it should open your mind, your heart. An experience of opening the heart to the mind. And he says here, quote, and this was much quoted by everybody, one perception must move instanter upon another. It's a quote. One perception must move instanter upon another, instant by instant by instant. That is, you perceive and perceive and perceive and perceive. It's not one thing. The poem is moving. It's moving as you're moving, breathing, hearing. And then Robert Creeley, the great poet, was an extension of that, also another Black Mountain person. Quote, form is never more than an extension of content, unquote. Form is never more than an extension of content. That is, turn it around. Don't use the form to contain. The content must be principle. And any of these people, these formalists, and they abound everywhere. They always want to tell you that the form is principle. It's not the form that's principle, it's the content. What you saying? Like you always say that to people. Well, what are you saying? And that's what we want from the art. What are you saying? One of these early Maximus poems begins, quote, it was he, the figure of outward. He was there. He was the figure of outward extension, opening, mentioned in some connection to Robert Creeley, who in his own way was out. And the poem Maximus, projected from where the poet himself lived, Gloucester, a poem describing the place and coming into it of itself, self-creation, but also the going out, the observations of the poet, which included the nation, the world, all of history, natural and human. The poem breaks down the restrictions of the literary close verse, but even the form of its composition, reflecting newly the typewriter's use of creating a score, like a musical score. The lines are not like that. They're how you hear them, dot, 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 according to your breath, which Ginsberg set me onto when I first came to New York. It is the breath phrase. That was William Carlos Williams talking, the breath phrase. What is your natural breath phrase? When you talk, where do you stop to breathe? What is your line going to be as a reflection of yourself? Your poetic line. There's no arbitrary line you must write to hear. You write until you stop naturally, and you pick it up, and you write. You stop naturally again. Your breath. Where do you have to breathe? So he says, the poem breaks down the restrictions of the literary close verse, but even the form of its composition, reflecting newly the typewriter's use in creating a score. So the poem becomes a score, and we always tell people, this is just a score. You want to know what that poem sounds like? You have to have it read. You don't know from the page, that's a score. Like, if you know music, you could look Duke Ellington stuff on the page, but to hear Duke live, you have to hear the band. You have to hear the orchestra, to actually hear it. So he says, let me put it baldly. The head by way of the ear to the syllable, the heart by way of the breath to the line. That was his formula. As he says, the head by way of the ear. You hear it. It's in your head, you hear what you're saying to the syllable, each syllable. Then the heart by way of the breath to the line. How long the line is, where it breaks off. Where it breaks off is how you read it. You don't know what it sounds like until you hear it. And why Maximus of Tyre, he projected himself from that persona, a 4th century Greek philosopher of ethics. Taken thinly, it is a costume of sorts, but deeper, the projection of a particular way of seeing and thinking. That is Maximus, a 4th century Greek philosopher. Then Maximus is in Gloucester. You see, this philosopher of ethics in Gloucester. Herman Sonny Blount is from Birmingham, Alabama. When at the height of his mystical summoning of space-time, the heavens, angels, and demons into the music, with such albums as The Magic City, we learned later that was named after Birmingham. Birmingham's official suffragette is The Magic City. We didn't know that. We thought Sun Ra had created something weird, but he was just talking about his hometown. Yeah. The Magic City. So that as Sun Ra, even the city of his birth could be given other amazing qualities. See, that's a parallel again. Gloucester for Charles and Birmingham become magical places by the fact that they named them that. But the music he created and the persona he had thrust into the world is Sun Ra. It is the parallels that tie Olson and Ra together, that they both exert great influence over American art during the 50s until this day. Olson died in 1970, Sun Ra in 1993. In his preparatory development, Sun Ra, still Sonny Blount, was an arranger and pianist with Fletcher Henderson. You see, Sun Ra was old. He was a pianist with Fletcher Henderson Orchestra, one of the cauldrons of early swing that would, through the accretion of hypnosis, give rise to the Duke Ellington great orchestral classicism and Count Basie's nonpareil vehicle of swing. So that Henderson was actually the on-the-job creator of the big jazz orchestra, and it was here that Ra received his on-the-job training, as they would say in the service. So we can take this as parallel to Olson's academic pursuits, his reading for his stretching out. By 1950, when Olson writes projective verse, is the same year that Sun Ra, who changes his name to resonate the ancient Egyptian sun god, that is, he has now moved away or forward from his schooling in Swing University, which Phil Schaap still uses on WKCR, was revived at Lincoln Center, at least a somewhat mobile institution, to become a force of its own creation. In the late 40s, Olson had gone down to Black Mountain College to become its last rector, as Sun Ra was going to Chicago to begin his manifestation as Ra. When the first word of a cosmic jazz began to be heard, albums like Sun Ra Visits Planet Earth, Interstellar Lowways, Angels and Demons at Play, We Travel the Spaceways, which is a beautiful song, confirmed that it's more than a rumor that there is indeed a cosmic jazz, and that it is Holy Barak, emanating from Chicago, which has been the capital of Black America after move north from the Black Belt and Atlanta. Interesting. What is interesting is that Ra's whole projection is like a black mythology. He even called one of his orchestras, ARK, orchestras, Sun Ra and his Myth Science Orchestra. Olson and his use of his home Gloucester as a place to build a history and a mythology that in essence wanted to put, as he said, quote, put the hinges back on the door, unquote, so that we might go back and forth in a living history of space as well as time to begin to know ourselves and the place we are. I think I hear the spaceship now. Did we ask to go somewhere? Now, Ra would don a costume. In fact, by the time I first saw him, and the orchestra in the 1960s. When he played, they were completely outfitted, as if from that vantage point, from outer space, he could see the planet and its people and its problems from a higher viewpoint. If Olson would speak from an ancient philosopher's persona, yet be rooted in the day-to-day livingness of Gloucester, Massachusetts, an old fishing village, which also fueled, and which he had been fueled by his passion for Melville, as well as his terror and resolve to remove himself from the evil of the white whale, U.S. imperialism. His pursuit had demented Ahab and would destroy the ship named after Native Americans, the Pequot, and his multinational crew. So what Olson says here, it says, quote, "In the midst of plenty, walk as close to bear. In the land of plenty, have nothing to do with it. Take the way of the lowest, including your legs. Go contrary, go sing." It's Maximus, Song 3 now. That dude who wrote that book in Mexico, whatever his name is, saying that Olson was imperialist, he just had to read that passage. Quote, "In the midst of plenty, walk as close to bear. In the land of plenty, have nothing to do with it. Take the way of the lowest, including your legs. Go contrary, go sing." So that Olson would remove himself to the isolation and poverty of Gloucester, while Sun Ra would remove himself from the planet itself. What makes these stances so magnetic is the context of the 60s itself, that whole period in which Mao Zedong summed up as, quote, "Revolution is the main trend in the world today." Some pundit of the beats would describe this motion away from the mainstream as, quote, "turn on, tune in, and drop out," unquote. In this case, there's a certain self-cultivation as well as self-anointment. But it was as close as the beats would come to the truth of leaving the craven concerns of straight-up America. One of the most beautiful songs Sun Ra composed was, we travel the spaceways from planet to planet." They used to have these women and the band walk around, the audience, singing that song. We travel the spaceways from planet to planet. The music by this time was part of a whole pageant that Sun Ra presented. The members of the orchestra, like the Ark of the Noah, stepping, dancing, sometimes circling in their space costume. Two of his greatest musicians, Marshall Allen, who's still alive, plays the alto, and John Gilmore, tenor, at the forward end of the new music. Gilmore died a few months after Sun Ra. Allen is about to celebrate, I guess, his 87th year, still a leader of the avant-garde. The names of Sun Ra's orchestras changed as, for instance, Omniverse Orchestra, Solo Myth Orchestra, Outer Space Orchestra, Astro Infinity Orchestra, Blue Universe Orchestra, and on and on. Some 30 names I know of his orchestras through the years, 30 different changes. There's a book you can read called Omniverse, Sun Ra, by a German, Hartmut Gierken and Bernhard Heffle, Wait a While Press, Germany. And what Ra would say is, changing names is exciting. To be another other. The cover of the new book of mine, a couple of years ago, called Digging, the Afro-American Soul of American Classical Music, University of California. On the front cover is the front of the Black Arts Repertory Theater School, circa 1965, which was located at 130th Street and Lenox Avenue in Harlem. And at that cover, you see me sitting at the bottom of the step, no, on the bottom of the step rather than walk up, and I have a bag of refreshments. And it's really that wine that don't come from grapes. It's some other kind of wine. And at the top of the crowded staircase, because there's people standing around all the time, at the top of the staircase, you see Sun Ra standing there. He came to the school many times and played for us on one of 4 trucks. We used to send 4 trucks out every day music on one truck, graphic arts on another truck, poetry on another truck, drama to play in vacant lots, parks, play streets, projects. Sun Ra and I talked almost every day. On Wednesday night, he would bring the orchestra and blow the place up. Ra was the first I had seen to use the synthesizer, which he called a space organ. Then he had a synthesizer with tubular lights put on it, and it shined bright colors for high notes and dark colors for low notes. This was the first light show I witnessed. Sometime before Billy Graham copped in San Francisco and used for his rock shows. That's where they came from, you know. So you say, "I go to spaceways," you know, the lights. It was in this context that Ra taught me and the others at the arts, notably Steve Young, who was our administrative backbone. He taught us his cosmic philosophy, but for me especially his understanding of language. Larry Neal, the great poet, never talked about. Larry Neal and I included Ra's poetry in the anthology, the Black Arts anthology we produced called Black Fire, reprinted in 2008 by Black Classic Press in Baltimore. The poetry and prose collected in what was called the Immeasurable Equation. Ra taught that a word is not only an idea, but a sound. It's not only an idea, a word, but a sound. It has force and power, and the way it sounded, dig Olson, the way it sounded makes it open in the world of what it sounds like, and its many meanings manifest at once to the digger. When we first arrived in Harlem, I carried the Black Arts flag designed by painter William White. And what it is, interestingly enough, the frown at the top of the world, the smile at the bottom of the world. Those are the two masks. You see the two masks of art. They're always like that, you know. Cold, hot. That's what it is. And so there's a quote of mine given 10 years ago, now 12 years ago, on the back of a book by Harvard music historian John Zvade. He wrote a book called Space is the Place. And my quote was, Sun Ra's consistent statement, musically and spoken, is that this is a primitive world. Its practices, beliefs, religion are uneducated, unenlightened, savage, destructive, already in the past. That's why Sun Ra returned only to say he left, into the future, into space. Sun Ra's relentless admission that he really was from Saturn, that is not from here, and that he was an angel, though sometimes he would say that if people going along with the corrupt Earth systems were considered good, then he was a demon. When a German reporter confronted Sun Ra a few years ago saying, in effect, "Come on, Sun Ra, tell the truth, you haven't really been to Jupiter." Ra's answer was, "No, but I have been to Saturn." Ra and Olson were perfect mentors for the most advanced artists of the 60s and still at this moment. To give a list of those artists he influenced is endless. But for instance, by Olson, Robert Creeley, Edward Dorn, two outstanding. By Sun Ra, John Gilmore, Marshall Allen, and so many others. A great deal of time by both. It would be a who's who of great and important artists of the last part of the 20th century. We should go on that into detail in the next note. So that's the essay that I wrote on that. Thank you. I think if you want a copy of that, I think my son's got some copies of that, which you can get for $1. That is what it cost me to reproduce it. If you don't have any questions about that, I'm going to read a couple of poems. And then, let's see. There's a lot of stuff here, Jesus. Yeah. When I was a kid growing up in Newark, New Jersey, I used to read Chinese and Japanese poetry. You say, how is that possible? Well, my grandmother was a domestic. She used to do the hair for rich white ladies in the suburbs. And she would come home with these various books, which she said they gave her. She was my grandmother, so I believed her. So I read something called a haiku, you know, in Japanese. So I said I would create something for black people called a loku. Since we don't have the time to count the syllables, because we got to get out of there. So they're just short. Dun 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 dun. That's Bud Powell, Un Poco Loku. So I call this book Un Poco Loku. Dun 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 dun. Loku for so what? They asked him the difference between insane and outsane. He said, you know the difference, that's why you ask it. 2 days later, they came back. He had left a note. It said the same thing. That's when his picture went up in the post office. The caption read, wanted for any reason you could think of. This meant they really did understand. Dun 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 bum 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 bum. Question with no air. Why are they so crazy? 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 Why? Bum 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 bum. The pet's reward. On Miss Daisy's deathbed, she told Morgan Freeman he was her best friend. So what about the dog? Dun, 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 dun. Silent night. Whenever the devil is disguised as God, he is called Santa Claus. Dun, 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 dun. Fanon. The cruelest thing the Nazis did, and the most grim, was to turn some of their victims into them. Bum, 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 bum. Was it ever so quiet? The room began to ask you questions. Bum, 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 bum. Adventures in Negrosity. A Negro tried to cash himself for money at a bank. He got arrested as a counterfeit nickel. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. Culture. European Jews say the devil speaks perfect German. Black Americans, on the other hand, say he speaks pretty good English, too. Dun, 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 dun. Locomotive. The devil said he left heaven because there was too many niggas. That's why he started Europe. Bum, 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 bum. Geobolical. According to the devil, when he was first thrown out of heaven, he landed in England. I believe him. Dun, 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 dun. Heaven appeared with property, God with slavery. Heaven appeared with property, God with slavery. Dun, bum, 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 bum. Before fortune was money. Finally, everything points to the people and things we understand. Understanding is a point of view. If you look, what looks down from that point? If it is the sun, okay. If you see it, better. If you don't, okay. But for instance, and there you go across the sea to be with the devil. The preparation for pain is minimal. The preparation for pain is minimal. For joy, a lifetime. Is that fair, we ask? Is that fair? You mean a fee, a circus, or white people? Bum, 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 bum. The return of Lon Chaney. If you see a Negro with a white ring around his mouth, Gooba dust will not help. Bum, 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 bum. Loku. Craziness is no act. Not to act is craziness. Bum, 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 bum. This whole book of these loku, and I just read them. Achtung. The American word for Nazi is American. Dun, 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 dun. Catch 27. The real problem is you don't know the real problem. Dun, 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 dun. Loku for Bush 2. The main thing wrong with you is you ain't in jail. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Class gas for those who knows. Since the rich eat more than anybody else, it is reasonable to assume that they are more full of shit. Dun, 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 dun. In the funk world, if Elvis Presley is king, who is James Brown? God? Thank you. That's my coups for today. I think I've got a couple more to read. I'm going to cut you all loose in a minute. Oh, this one I just wrote this week, or last week. It's called The Original Terrorists. The terrorists have been here a long time, the ones who took the slaves, the ones who ran and underbossed the plantations, especially those who made money from them. They're still at it. They never stop. These old guard terrorists, and they still at it, still terrorizing. When slavery was supposed to be ended, they thought up the Klan, the Knights of the White Camellia. When we were supposed to get reparations, they got Andrew Johnson, a barefoot white man, to stop it. Every time we take a step, these terrorists appear. They ain't never gone nowhere. But you take a step forward, they come out. King spoke, I have a dream, and we paid for it with the 4 little girls blown up in Birmingham. Before that, we won the bus boycott. The terrorists blew up Dr. King's house. The real terrorists been with us hundreds of years. Du Bois called it the Sisyphus syndrome. You push the rock up the mountain, the terrorists appear and try to roll it back down. Now, Obama get in, defeating Cain's son, the same as the one in the Bible. Live in Arizona where they shot that congresswoman in the head, and now want to ban Latino studies. These are them terrorists, still terrorizing. That's Goldwater State, famously backward, a terrorist. McCain turned tail in Vietnam, he came back a hero terrorist. Terrorists just the same. We get clear enough to elect Obama, the terrorists take off their Klan clothes and put on suits. They the Tea Party now, TEA, the evil assholes. They're terrorists. They terrorists and Nazis, like always. They do anything to stop America's getting rid of its craziness. They never let all of us be Americans. They terrorists. And the Republicans, they got Negroes too. They got real public coons. They terrorists too, like Tom S. Clarence and his evil wife. Citizens United, they terrorists, hurt us worse than the Taliban. GOP, grand old psychopaths. What Al-Qaeda can do, the Republicans can. They've been doing it in one costume or another for hundreds of years. Now they're so frustrated. Their racist addiction coming down on them. Boehner's nose running. Got new maniacs to please. Old Jones coming down. Ted Cruz, a Texas junkie, had a crying jag in Congress. Or the other nut, Ryan, trying to stop you from sending your kids to college. He's a real mullah, for sure. Terrorists took over Congress. Listen to them. Absolute nuts. What Taliban can do, they are doing. Close down the United States government. Now, who would do that? Think about it. What the Taliban and Al-Qaeda can do, terrorists in the Congress, lock down the government because there's a black dude there, just like they would in the 19th century when the blood wanted to vote. Obamacare, they scream, Obamacare. When they've been getting Obamacare all over Europe since World War II. We're facing the sickness and destruction of terrorists. They've been terrorizing all of us for hundreds of years, terrorists. When are we going to catch them and lock them up, these terrorists? When are we going to catch them and lock them up? Then we can cure ourselves, America, of what has always ailed us. Thank you. Thank you very much. The Swahili word for Holocaust is Matha. So if you ask us how has it been for blacks in America, we say it's been a Matha. I think I'm going to read one poem if I can find it and come out. Where is it? No, not that one. Oh, here you go. This poem got me into a lot of trouble several years back. I was, we lived right across the water from Twin Towers. So we could see the smoke and stuff coming out of the buildings. So it was kind of chilling. I mean, you read about it or heard about it, but we could see it across the water, So, I was frightened like everybody else. I even had a daughter, one of my stepdaughters over there, who didn't call to tell us she wasn't in that building till later. But then I started to get pissed off, I started saying, terrorists. But that's how we got here. I'm an African. How did I get over here? I don't even like the weather. So I wrote this poem about a month later and sent it on the net around, and I got some comments back, most positive, some negative. And then I read the poem, then I got named as the Poet Laureate of New Jersey, which I held that post about 20 seconds. But I read this poem at the Dodge Poetry Festival and got a call from the governor's office, Governor McGreevey. The next day, he said, "You got to resign and apologize." I said, "No, I'm not going to do that, So then they start, what they do. They put you in the papers, you're a bad person and stuff like that. But the difference is, when I came home, since the poem was printed on the front page of the Star Ledger, the people in the street were applauding. See, they got different lives than, say, the Americans. They live in that terrible little town, Newark. So for them, they know me since I was a little boy. So they know my intent, So anyway, the irony is they got rid of the Poet Laureate position. They want to become officially ignorant all over the planet. So that's what they did. But the irony is that McGreevey had to resign a year later for having a homosexual affair with one of his staff members. But I thought that was weird, because if he was gay, he should have just said, "I'm gay. And I'm the governor, now what?" But he didn't do that. And now I heard that he's in a seminary. I don't know what that means. I won't comment on that. But he had to resign and apologize too. See? Somebody blew up America, all thinking people oppose terrorism, both domestic and international. But one should not be used to cover the other. Somebody blew up America. They say it's some terrorist, some barbaric Arab in Afghanistan. It wasn't our American terrorists. It wasn't the Klan or the skinheads or them that blows up nigger churches or reincarnates us on death row. It wasn't Trent Lott or David Duke or Giuliani or Schindler. Helms is dead. It wasn't the gonorrhea in costume, the white sheet diseases that have murdered black people, terrorized reason and sanity, most of humanity as they pleases. They say, who do the saying? Who is them paying? Who tell the lies? Who in disguise? Who had the slaves? Who got the bucks out the bucks? Who got fat from plantations? Who genocided Indians, tried to waste the black nation? Who live on Wall Street, the first plantation, who cut your nuts off, who rape your ma, who lynch your pa, who got the tar, who got the feathers, who had the match, who set the fires, who killed and hired, who say they God and still be the devil. Who the biggest only, who the most goodest, who do Jesus resemble, who created everything, who the smartest, who the greatest, who the richest, who say you ugly and they the good lookingest, who define art, who defines science, who made the bums, who made the guns, who bought the slaves, who sold them, who call you them names, who say Dahmer wasn't insane, who stole Puerto Rico, who stole the Indies, the Philippines, Manhattan, Australia, and the Hebrides, who forced opium on the Chinese, who owned them buildings, who got the money, who think you funny, who lock you up, who own the papers, who own the slave ship, who run the army, who was the fake president, who the ruler, who the banker, who owned the mind, who twist your mind, who got bread, who need peace, who you think need war, who owned the oil, who do no toil, who owned the soil, who is not a nigger, who is so great ain't nobody bigger, who owned this city, who owned the air, who owned the water, who owned your crib, who rob and steal and cheat and murder, make lies the truth, who call you uncouth, who live in the biggest house, who do the biggest crime, who go on vacation anytime, who kill the most niggers, who kill the most Jews, who kill the most Italians, who kill the most Irish, who kill the most other Africans, who kill the most Japanese, who kill the most Latinos, who own the ocean, who own the airplanes, who own the malls, who own television, who own radio, who own what ain't been known to be owned, who own the owners that ain't the real owners, who own the suburbs, who suck the cities, who make the laws, who made Bush president, who believed the Confederate flag need to be flying, who talk about democracy and be lying, who the beasts in Revelation, who's 666, who decide Jesus get crucified? Who the devil on the real side? Who got rich from Armenian genocide? Who the biggest terrorists? Who changed the Bible? Who killed the most people? Who do the most evil? Who don't worry about survival? Who have the colonies? Who stole the most land? Who rule the world? Who say they good but only do evil? Who the biggest executioner? Who owned the oil? Who want more oil? Who told you what you think that later you find out is a lie? Who found Bin Laden? Maybe they Satan. Who paid the CIA? Who knew the bomb was gonna blow? Who know why the terrorists learned to fly in Florida and San Diego? Who know why 5 Israelis was filming the explosion and cracking their sides at the ocean? Who need fossil fuel? The sun ain't going nowhere. Who make the credit cards? Who get the biggest tax cut? Who walked out of the conference against racism? Who killed Malcolm, Kennedy, and his brother? Who killed Dr. King? Who would want such a thing? Are they linked to the murder of Lincoln? Who invaded Grenada? Who made money from apartheid? Who keep the Irish a colony? Who overthrew Chile and Nicaragua later? Who killed David Sebeco, Chris Hani, the same ones who killed Biko, Cabral, Neruda, Allende, Che Guevara, Sandino, who killed Kabila, the ones who wasted Lumumba, Manlane, Betty Shabazz, Princess Di, Ralph Featherstone, Little Bobby, locked up Mandela, Deruba, Geronimo, Asada, Mumia, Garvey, Dashiell Hammett, Alphaeus Hutton, who killed Huey Newton, Fred Hampton, Medgar Evers, Mikey Smith, Walter Rodney. Was it the ones who tried to poison Fidel? Who tried to keep the Vietnamese oppressed? Who put a price on Lenin's head? Who put the Jews in ovens and who helped them do it? Who said America first and okayed the yellow stars? Who killed Rosa Luxemburg? Liebknecht, who murdered the Rosenbergs? And all the good people iced, tortured, assassinated, vanished. Who got rich from Algeria, Libya, Haiti, Iran, Iraq, Saudi, Kuwait, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, Palestine? Who cut off people's hands in the Congo? Who invented AIDS? Who put the germs in the Indians' blankets? Who thought up the Trail of Tears? Who blew up the Maine and started the Spanish-American War? Who got Sharon back in power? Who backed Batista, Hitler, Bilbo, Chiang Kai-shek? Ho! Who decided affirmative action had to go? Reconstruction, the New Deal, the New Frontier, the Great Society. Who do Tom Ass Clarence work for? Who do come out the colon's mouth? Who know what kind of skeezer is a Condoleezza? Who paid Connolly to be a wooden Negro? Who gives genius awards to Homo locus subsidiary? Who overthrew Nkrumah, Bishop? Who poisoned Robeson? Who tried to put Du Bois in jail? Who framed Rep. Brown, Jamil Al-Amin? Who framed the Rosenbergs, Garvey, the Scottsboro Boys, the Hollywood 10? Who set the Reichstag fire? Who knew the World Trade Center was going to get bombed? Who told 4,000 Israeli workers at the Twin Towers to stay home that day? Why did Sharon stay away? Who? Explosion of owl, the newspapers say, the devil's face to be seen. Ho! Who make money from war? Who make dough from fear and lies? Who want the world like it is? Who want the world to be ruled by imperialism and national oppression and terror, violence and hunger and poverty? Who is the ruler of hell? Who is the most powerful? Who you know ever seen God? But everybody's seen the devil. Like an owl exploding in your life, in your brain, in yourself. Like an owl who know the devil all night, all day. If you listen like an owl exploding in fire, we hear the questions rise in terrible flame like the whistle of a crazy dog. Like the acid vomit of the fire of hell. Who and who and who and who and who and who? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. If you've got one or two questions before I scatter, I'll be glad to try to answer them. Yes?
I'd like to ask a somewhat delicate question. It's clear to many of us who know your work for many, many years that there's a great gift in many of these areas, poetry, drama, criticism, etc. However, it seems that a strain in your work from the beginning has been a kind of anti-white and anti-Jewish animus. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
No.
Is it there? Is it not there?
Well, let's say this.
For example, when you speak of the Jewish workers who were...
No, I didn't say Jewish workers. Don't put words in my mouth.
What did you say, Israeli?
I said Israeli workers.
Israeli, okay.
That's a separate state from the United States.
That's okay.
Okay.
Most Jewish people support the state of Israel.
Yes.
But be that as it may, is that strain there in your
Well,
thinking?
let's say this. I don't know any black person in their right mind that welcomes the idea of slavery, and would talk bad about slavery to the end of their life, to this day, and the fact that it's continued and continued. In terms of the animus toward Israel, I must confess that there's a lot of stuff Israel does I don't like. But for you to conflate that into Jews is just the defense of Israel. Doesn't have anything. If you think that the Israelis are crime-free and sin-free, that's your particular perspective on it. But I don't believe that. I support the Palestinians. I support that land should be shared. I don't believe it should be just Israel to do what it wants to. And Netanyahu, and like they're Americans. Netanyahu is from Philadelphia. You know what I mean? The ambassador to the United States from Israel is from West Orange, New Jersey. I mean, this is a great sham that somehow they're supposed to have risen there in the Middle East. That's not true. It's not true. It is an imperialist state. And no matter what you say about me, I will continue to say that. It's true. You know, it's not just me. You know, all you have to do is look at it, you know, and look at history. You know, and if you don't think the Palestinians are people, then, you know, we've got to argue that.
May I make a quick
Could we
rejoinder?
get another
One sentence?
question or two?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes? Okay. First of all, the question of Israel versus Palestine, you and I cannot debate today.
We
But-
can't? Okay.
No, I'm happy to debate you, yeah.
Sir,
But
sir,
he
excuse
is
me, this was
permitted
a
me.
lecture on Charles
He is
Olson
yes, I
and
understand.
Sumner,
I got it.
and we'd
So
like to have
the
a
other
couple
point,
more.
the other
we
point.
It's all right with me. I don't have a problem with
Okay
it.
with you?
Sir,
He's
Huh?
asked me to make a.
I don't have a problem with it.
My question is this. President Obama has come to the White House. We have here a distinguished poet who is also African American. Has there not been in this country, with all its flaws, an extraordinary, unbelievable transformation of attitude toward those who are African American?
Well, let me say this. You know, the United States is still not the land of the free and home of brave. And black people are still in a state of slavery, no matter what you might think. And I, who am a spokesperson for that people, will resent it and talk bad about it until I die. That's all I can tell you about that. You know, and the fact that if Obama came out of the White House and walked down Pennsylvania Avenue now, he would begin to understand. I don't think Obama ever met real white people before. He met his mama, his stepfather, you know, not his stepfather. That's his grandfather and his grandmother. Those are all liberal white people. I don't think he ever came to the United States and met the real deal until he got here, because he come over here expecting bipartisanship. But they have never agreed with him about anything. And so now that he stood up when they closed down the government, you know, at last he's taken a stand. To me, that has to be his legacy the last years there. He has to resist these people. He has to resist these people, and it might take all kinds of talking bad about him, but I don't see it, you know. The stuff that they say, even today, is infuriating. I mean, you listen to people like Boehner, Ryan, and those people, they're infuriating. Ted Cruz, those are infuriating people, you know, because everything they say is a mask for they're going to still kick your ass no matter what, you know. So we have to fight them. That's the way I look at it. And I'm sorry that you think that I have some kind of resentment toward Jews. It's simply not true. You know, I was married to a Jewish woman for, God knows, 8 years or something like that, but it's not that. But it's just that, you know, the question is the same. And if you look at my work, even when I was there married, you will find the same kind of resentment, you know. So if there's no other questions, thank you all. Take care.